Wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. Thrilled to be here again and see some familiar faces. It's been a great summer joining you all. As I just shared, this kind of topic really hits home with me. My background is actually in recreation. I have 2 degrees, one in recreation administration and one in therapeutic recreation. So using recreation as a means to heal and help people overcome challenges in their life. So I really loved working on developing this program for you all. So we have a lot to get through today, but I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to get through it all. I do apologize. There was a last minute handout that I had to send to Krista today. So you don't necessarily need it for our session today, but there are lots of resources in there, and we're going to touch on some of those resources. So you know, it's undeniable. We have found ourselves in a very unique situation over the past 6 months or so. And I was even just telling someone yesterday, when I really sit and think about, you know, what we're doing, like even what I'm doing right now, I'm giving a webinar from my home. Sometimes it just seems so surreal. Like, is this still really happening? So we know that our normal lives and our routines have been disrupted. We face uncertainties about the future and what that will hold for us. So there's a lot of things that are going on, you know, not only in our internal lives, but also in the internal lives of the children that we work with. And they have experienced the disruption right along with us. And we know that the beginning of the school year won't be business as usual. We're going to try to make it as normal as possible, but things are going to be a little bit different. And it's certainly true that the effect on the worldwide pandemic on children is still emerging in terms of, you know, what long-term outcomes or long-term impacts they're going to have from living through this time period. One thing is very crystal clear. Children are not immune to the major effects of the disruption during the pandemic. A lot of the work that I've done recently has been with ACEs and being trauma informed and family stress. And children are picking up on all of those things that have happened to their families during the pandemic. And even their social existence once we start thinking about everything that they've lived through. Just a side note, my own son is kind of slowly getting back into sports, and he had his first sports practice last night since May, and he was really nervous about just getting back into that normal swing of things and even seeing his peers, and he was having some anxiety. And this is my normal, socially outgoing, you know, take on the world type of kid. So it is very evident that everything that we've lived through is going to have an impact on the students that we work with. And really, the antidote to stress and the chaos that students have experienced really is play and outdoor time. It supports the transition back into learning. It can help buffer stress response, and it can also provide a way for kids to heal from the stress that they've experienced this year. And bringing play and playfulness into your classroom and curricula is also a way to help you cope and heal as well. So some of the things that we're going to do today, we're going to discover why play and playfulness will be extremely important in transitioning back into the classroom. We're going to learn about the effectiveness of outdoor classrooms and how to safely implement outdoor activities. We're also going to look at a little bit at brain breaks and why those are important to help increase attention and focus while mitigating stress. That's one thing that I often kind of think about in the transition back to the classroom that might not be on our radar is, you know, when children were doing remote learning, they kind of had some naturally occurring ways to take brain breaks, right? They were at home, so there was a little more flexibility and less rigidness in terms of when they could just naturally take a break from their studies. So some of them might have some problems transitioning back to classroom rules, and especially some of the things that we have to put in place for safety. proponent of resources. So whenever I go to professional development activities, I'm like, okay, yeah, all this is good. I understand the why, but I definitely want to have the how. So I have lots of resources for you, not only in the handout, but also some that we're going to talk about in the actual webinar. So just before we get started though, I want to just have a little question for you and I know we only have 9 or so of us on, but in the chat box, if you could just share what's a playful way that you cope with your current stress. Okay, so we can all probably identify ways that we cope with stress, you know, taking a walk or exercising or meditating. But I'm really curious if you have a playful way that you cope with your stress. So I'll give you a second to write those down or share those. Playing board games, great. Yeah, thanks, Krista. Other playful ways you cope with stress. And if you're at a loss, that's okay. It's a kind of a tricky question. Yeah, Candy Crush, good. So playing a game, sure. All right, any others out there? Any other ideas? Playing with your cats. So when I think about playful way of coping with stress, so barn time, doing walks, enjoying the pool, playing backgammon, great ideas. Singing loud. I just want to ask you, and you don't have to answer in the chat box, but when was the last time you actually swang on a swing set? Or swung? I guess that's the proper term. Now, we're all adults. That's probably not something that we often look forward to and think, oh, I'm going to go out and swing, you know, to manage my stress. I actually had the opportunity, it was back in June. I was visiting some family, and we had taken my children to go fishing, and there is a playground at the lake. This is after playgrounds were reopened. There's a playground at the lake that we were at, and by the time we were done, I found myself spending some time on the swings, and I thought, this is like pretty fun, right? And even though I'm not setting out saying, oh, I'm gonna, you know, go swing to reduce my stress, it was just one of those things that made me feel more playful, that made me feel more relaxed and calm and content. And I giggled, you know, like a child again. So I really want to encourage you as we go through our material today to think about incorporating more playfulness into your daily life with whatever that looks like. Sometimes, you know, we as adults, we can get locked into kind of our serious worlds, and we often forget how beneficial play is even for us and in having a playful attitude. So think about injecting more play back into your daily life, because play is good for all of us at any age, and it does have many benefits. As I shared a few minutes earlier, my background is as a recreation therapist, and I'm not embarrassed at all to share with people that when I was in college, I actually took classes on play and games. I took a camping class actually in my master's program where we went out and we did rugged camping for a week, and we learned all about how to modify camping for people with disabilities. So when I think about myself personally, I chose a career that focused on the restorative benefits of play and leisure. So, you know, I really love to take any opportunity that I can to encourage people to make the most of their leisure time, but also to incorporate and inject some playfulness as well. So as we're kind of introducing our topic today and thinking about why this is important, I just wanted to kind of recap. And if you joined earlier in the summer where we were talking about ACEs, you probably remember this slide, but I just wanted to kind of review quickly the different types of stress and kind of relate how they are linked to the children that will be in our classrooms this fall. So there are essentially 3 types of stress that we all experience, but when we think about how children experience stress, this is especially important. So the first type of stress is positive stress. It is considered normal, and it really is an important part of growing up. So even last night, as my son was stressed out and anxious, about his first practice in a long time. That is a type of positive stress, right? It helps us get through a situation. It essentially helps us also build our resilience as well, because we learn from those experiences how to cope with the stressors in our life. So some would say that some level of stress is actually required. Now, that middle level of stress is tolerable stress. And this is generally short in duration, but they can be intense experiences. So I often think of short hospital stays, if a child is in a car accident, or if there's even a death in the family. Those are all examples of tolerable stress. And that type of stress really is lessened by the presence of a caring individual or adult who can help the child get through that difficult time. And then that final level of stress that we have is toxic stress. And this is strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity. So things like chronic neglect, poverty, caregiver substance abuse or mental health issues, really significant events in the lives of children, but they have a longer duration than tolerable stress. And tolerable stress, or excuse me, toxic stress can cause chronic and severe stress response in children. And that leads to serious implications for their developing brain and their developing bodies. So we do know that when a child experiences toxic stress, it does result in changes to the brain, specifically in the areas of the brain that are responsible for learning, memory, and even the stress response system that happens, that occurs, or that is generated in the brain. And these changes really can provide long-term impairment in those structural areas of the brain that are responsible for those things. We also know that when a child is exposed to toxic stress for a long period of time, there's changes in the prefrontal cortex, which is where decision making happens, judgment, even impulse control and attention. And that, again, can turn into difficulties with thinking and making decisions. And then toxic stress can also change the area of the brain called the amygdala. It's a structure in the brain. And that is the brain that's responsible for processing emotional reactions like anxiety and fear. And that might manifest into increased anxiety and even making the child more likely to have a fear response. So when we think about the pandemic situation and what we've all lived through these past couple months, we could probably classify the stress that's been experienced into these different categories. It's extremely important, though, to consider that response to any type of stress is highly individualized, and it's also based on the support that the child has available to help them cope. So, you know, children who have supports and have those positive caregivers in their life, they may have been more likely to deal with some of the stressors of the pandemic in a more adaptive way because they have that nurturing, caring adult helping them cope. However, children without that support and structure, they're likely to have experienced a prolonged stress response and a prolonged time of toxic stress even, which may have long-term impacts for them. So no matter what types of stress your students have experienced, the bottom line is that they have experienced stress. And it's also very likely due to the uncertainties about what the school year is going to bring and the new changes and, you know, adapting to all of the new safety measures, that is also stressful, that and will encourage the students to kind of continue to experience that anxiety and stress. But your classroom can be just one more place for the child to properly deal, process, and even heal from the stressors from the past few months and even the current ongoing uncertainties. So it's really kind of important as we kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today to keep those things in mind, that the work that we're going to be doing with play and taking things outside and brain breaks really is going to be necessary to help children cope with the demands that are going to be placed on them of both hybrid and even remote learning. So by using play and playfulness in the classroom, it gives everyone a break from the stressors that are experienced. It also kind of returns that sense of normalcy. So, you know, sometimes when I think about the things we're putting in place, they seem very rigid, right? As they need to be. So if we can approach, you know, some time of our day with play and playfulness, that returns that sense of, oh, hey, we can laugh. Oh, hey, we can still have fun at school. Oh, hey, I can still, you know, see my friends and it be a really positive experience. And it can also set the tone for a positive, engaging learning environment, which I think is something that we all want. By the way, if you have any questions, I tend to get really passionate about these topics. And I know I'm cramming a lot into the next 45 minutes. So if you have questions or you want to chime in, by all means, enter it in the chat box. So I love Penny teaching PE. If I was not a rec admin person, I'm sure I would have been a great PE teacher, because even as I'm going through all of these resources and research for in preparation for today, I'm like, yes, PE teachers have such a great role in doing all these great things. All right, so let's move on. So I just want you to think about some of the emotions that you think your students might be returning to the classroom and returning to school with. I kind of have hit on some of those, but it's likely that the children and the students will be returning with a variety of emotions. And that's important to recognize, but it's also important to recognize that children are going to be returning to us with differing levels and abilities on how to cope with their emotions, okay? So as children live through stress and trauma, it does become more difficult for them to access the areas of the brain that support thinking and reasoning. So the stress response system in our brain, it does allow us to be alert to all threats that are in our environment that may come up. And what happens is, as children experience prolonged stressors, it's kind of like that area in the brain goes into overdrive, where it becomes difficult to turn off once that sense of normalcy returns. So in students, what that might look like, it might look like more disruptive classroom behavior, the inability to concentrate or focus, or there might even be accompanying emotional or behavioral outbursts. So it does take our time, space, and understanding for that stress system to essentially reset and become less activated. And really, when I think about the role that play and playfulness has in resetting that stress response system, it is actually pretty crucial and pretty important, because both can help the body soothe that stress response system and provide benefits that extend beyond that play session or that brain break session. So it gives children time to reconnect with their friends, their classmates, their teachers. It can help them transition, and it can even improve their ability to pay attention in class. So I wanted just to talk briefly about this term playfulness. You know, it's not something that a term that we use every single day, but it has actually recently become one of my favorite terms, and it's my personal goal to be more playful in my daily life. So it is defined as the quality of being lighthearted or full of fun. So we know that children often look to adults for social cues in how to respond to stressful situations. So research has found that playful individuals report lower levels of perceived stress than their less playful counterparts. So even if we're going through the same stressors, individuals who approach things in a more playful way report lower rates of perceived stress. Playful individuals were also found in some research to have more positive coping skills in response to stress, suggesting that playfulness enhances this adaptive function, and it gives our brains specific cognitive resources that essentially enhance our coping skills in the face of stressful situations. One other study I found was on preschool classrooms, but they found that having a playful environment led to better cognitive social, and emotional development. So lots of good things can come from just the simple act of being more playful. And I think that's going to be important as we move forward this school year. Again, as things might seem kind of rigid, having that playful attitude and incorporating time and space for outdoor play as well is going to be a key success to our learning environments. So I just wanted to touch briefly on the benefits of play for kids. I think we could probably all identify what those are, but we know that play provides for the use of creativity and imagination. It can help children develop their motor skills, so things like balance, coordination, and dexterity. There's that social development through interaction with others and problem solving, conflict resolution. Play can also help conquer or master fear. It can help develop, grow new competencies, and even build resiliency. I found it interesting in some of the literature that I reviewed that recess actually began. So we all have recess in our schools, or have had recess in our schools. Where that concept began was way back when immigrants were coming in droves to the U.S. It began as a way for integration of immigrant children into the school setting. Recess really wasn't a thing until the Great Immigration started, and there was a needed way to have children kind of go through that social development and learn cultural norms and things like that. It also gives us some practice for decision making and discovery, and we know that play supports an active, healthy body, which I think is also going to be crucial as we reintegrate into the classroom. When I even just look at my own children, I'm sad to say they've spent a lot of time being sedentary during this remote learning period, or even just this summer, because we haven't been able to get out and do our normal things, and it's kind of become habituated that we spend more time in front of screens. So it is also likely that we all recognize play as a simple joy and a cherished part of childhood. And some might even say that play teaches us to be human, and that skills that are learned in play help children in the classroom, also in the workplace, in society, and then in their overall life. So there's lots of great things that play provides us, but I also wanted just to talk about the brain benefits of play as well. I do a lot of work in brain development and brain health. Play is often referred to as brain building for children. So some studies have shown that play has both direct and indirect effects on brain structure and functioning. Play has been shown to improve neural connectivity, so that's the connections between the brain cells. It also enhances the areas of the brain that are responsible for social, emotional, and executive functioning skills. It protects brain cells and their connections, their synapses, that are responsible for long-term memory. One interesting thing with some studies I found with play, that it helps connections in the area of the brain that's called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is actually in the temporal lobe. That's the blue shaded lobe on the screen. And it is responsible the hippocampus facilitates memory and learning. It is the key part of the brain that's responsible for learning. So that's kind of interesting that research has shown that play directly influences essentially how strong the brain cells in the hippocampus are. It also refines structures and connections in the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that is responsible for those executive functioning skills like problem solving and making judgments. So, play does a lot of great things for our bodies. It does a lot of great things for our development, but it specifically impacts how the brain functions. So, one other thing I like to kind of mention, when we are playing, or when children are playing, brain neurotransmitters are also activated. So norepinephrine is a chemical that's related to attention and action, and it has been found to improve how malleable, how plastic the brain is in some neurons. Norepinephrine is increased when we play. also dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter. That's a transmitter that's related to pleasure, and it's important for reward and motivation, memory and attention. Dopamine is also increased as we play. So, not only is it structure and function, but it also is in the brain chemicals that are kind of secreted and around as we play that can provide those long-term benefits. So, we talked a lot about stress. And this is like a super simple graph, but I love it because we know that as a child experiences adversity and stress, the role of play becomes even more important to help the body diffuse the stress response system, as I was talking about earlier. So when we're stressed, a chemical is released called cortisol, and that chemical is known as the body's stress hormone because of the role that it plays in the stress response system. And in small amounts, cortisol is perfectly fine. It helps us perform. It increases our heart rate, our blood pressure, our respiration, even our muscle tension, so we can respond to a threat. However, when long-term stress is experienced and cortisol is continually released, we are more at risk for anxiety, depression, impairments in memory and concentration, and even some structural changes in the brain. So really our overall goal here is to reduce or even stop the amount of cortisol that's released. And we can do that by interrupting the body's stress response system. So even if we have a child in our classroom who's experiencing ongoing toxic stress, even after our best interventions, we can still work towards reducing the impact that has by stopping that cortisol from continually being released. And how we do that is through, decreasing our demands of children, and play, outdoor recess, play breaks, brain breaks are all perfect vehicles to do that. So some studies have indicated that play is an indicator of health and resistance to stress. What I found was super interesting. Not a lot of research is actually conducted on humans because when it comes to stress and play, because it is unethical, especially with children, to intentionally stress them. So a lot of the work that's been done in this area has been done in animals. And researchers found that lower levels of cortisol are associated with high levels of play in young squirrel monkeys. And I found another study that just kind of really inspired me, honestly. In researching young bear cubs, their survival, so whether or not they lived through their first winter, was directly related to how much the cubs played that previous summer. So the researchers found those that were active and played a lot and had a playful nature, they were more likely to survive through the winter than cubs who did not have that experience. So play and toxic stress, or play and stress, are closely linked. And in that presence of that nurturing adult, play can buffer adversity, reduce those toxic stress levels, and even enhance coping and resilience. So lots of good things about play. Okay. So I love this quote. I think it's kind of important to hit the point home that this is really the natural and the primary way that children learn. Absolutely, Krista, thank you. Play-based learning is crucial. It's really the brain's default way of learning, right? I often think back to, pioneer times when, schools were not abundant in our country. And, pioneer children, they worked hard, but they also played and they learned through those experiences. So play really is an integral part to a comprehensive academic environment, even in the best of times. And, when I was developing this content, I certainly had in the back of my mind the time constrictions you all might have this year. I know a lot of schools have had reduced schedules, so time might be tight. And there's many demands on in-person instruction time. But it's important to remember that play helps kids feel safe, it helps them experience joy, and it helps them reconnect with their peers and their teachers. And research has consistently demonstrated these benefits of both play and recess time and time again. And these are benefits that will likely need to be maximized during this difficult time, because we know that students have been more socially isolated the past few months. Play gives them that transition time to kind of get back into being more interactive. We also know that community is built and it thrives through play, and that makes school a safe place once again. You know, I often think about the children who have very serious concerns and fears about contracting the virus. You know, through their eyes, school might be an unsafe place. So if we can provide some play opportunities and playfulness, we can ease those stress responses and, you know, send the message that school, again, is a safe place. So I wanted just to touch briefly on outdoor classrooms, because that is kind of one concept in terms of what we could look at to getting more outdoor time this coming school year. So I also recognize, you know, this is not going to be uh, an opportunity for everyone and all the time in every classroom. And certainly you'll have to follow your school and your district's guidance with this, but it is something to think about. You know, getting outdoors as much as possible. Some of the warmer climates they're naturally built to have more opportunity for outdoor classrooms. But I did just want to touch briefly on some of the research behind even taking academic instruction outside. There's lots of research in outdoor education. That actually was kind of a little minor, if you will, that I had when I was doing my studies in the field of recreation. But as we work towards incorporating more play and outdoor time in our daily schedule, we can expect some powerful impacts. Research has shown that when teachers move learning to the outdoors, student behavior improves, students are more excited to learn, and development is supported. So some other research demonstrated benefits also include improved test scores and attendance, an increase in physical, mental, and social health, and even that enhanced confidence, empathy, and motor skills as well, just by simply taking instruction outdoors. So it's kind of interesting to me. Access to nature has also been linked to decrease symptoms of ADHD, as well as the reduction of stress on students. So we all know just the benefits we even get when we get to spend more time outdoors. So whether you choose to teach academic content outdoors, or even if you just aim to include playful outdoor time regularly, it's clear that the access to nature and play will play a critical role in helping children readjust to the school environment and to heal from the adversity that's been brought about by the pandemic. One just kind of personal side note, I would also kind of be tuned in to, you know, your classroom. Hopefully your classroom has windows. I early on in all of this, when schools were thinking about their reopening plans and, you know, having students stay in a single classroom and having teachers rotate, I had one simple request from my school district. I did not want my child sitting all day in a classroom that did not have windows. Research has shown time and time again, even just being able to see nature through a window, see green space, is mood boosting. It can improve attention. It can just improve overall well-being. So, and thankfully, you know, that my district is great and responsive. And, but, you know, I also recognize too that it's a logistics thing this year, right? Schools are having to use every single available space. So luckily, the way my district is proceeding forward is no student will have to sit in an interior classroom with no windows all day. So even just consider your own classroom, you know, hopefully there's a window in there that you can, you know, pull the curtains, pull the blinds if you can, so students can at least have a view of the outdoors if possible. So I'm not going to spend much time on the recommendations. I'm sure you all are very familiar with them. I found the most recent copy of recommendations from the Illinois State Board of Education. This is dated June 23rd. I did find it so interesting that even right in the recommendations, they state that physical activity can support students' overall health and well-being and help reduce stress and anxiety. So I was like, bravo, thank you for encouraging those things in our classrooms this year. So you can access this document. I do have it linked in the handout. I'm sure you're familiar with some of those recommendations. I'm trying to think. A couple that I just want to share quickly. We should aim to avoid sports or games that require close guarding or potential physical contact. We should be looking for activities that allow for natural social distancing, which I have some resources for you all for that. And you know, maintaining distance as much as possible is also a good idea. So with all of these guidelines, you know, it may be difficult to determine what you can actually do for outdoor play. So we're going to talk about some specific resources later, but I just want to touch briefly on some just general things that we can and should do to make recess and outdoor play safe this year. So one resource that I found that I think is just really kind of groundbreaking, there's an alliance called the Global Recess Alliance, and it's a newly formed group of school educators, professionals, health professionals, education leaders. Their whole goal is to bring attention to the idea that recess specifically is essential during reopening. So this group has developed a statement on recess. I do have the link in the handout that makes these following recommendations. First of all, they are pretty adamant. Recess, playtimes, play breaks have to occur daily. Now, certainly different districts, different schools are going to have their own guidance around that. But you know, this is a leading group that have used research-based recess adaptations for schools and educators. So you know, they're pretty adamant that we should try to make time every single day for play and recess time. So we also want to make sure that recess staff, whoever's monitoring those things, that they're prepared, because we might see students that are more energetic. We might also see students that are more aggressive or even withdrawn. They might not be able to self-regulate, resolve their own conflicts, figure out how to play together. Remember, we're kind of reintegrating back into our social worlds, so there might be some hiccups. So the Alliance really believes that educators and playground staff should be aware of that. Certainly they have recommendations on disinfecting and hygiene practices, limiting the number of children at recess at given times, and or even potentially creating different activity stations, and really the avoidance of overly structured or sedentary activities, which when I read this recommendation, I kind of chuckled to myself because I was like, overly structured, yet in a minute, we're going to talk about ideas for games and activities, which are structured activities. So I think there is definitely balance there, but the work of this group really can be utilized to help schools and educators develop plans to create healthy and safe opportunities for their students. So Penny, I am right there with you, because even when Krista approached me about this, I'm like, okay, what can we do when we can't use any equipment and children can't touch each other, right? And honestly, my brain automatically went, well, we just can't do it, right? Like it just can't be done, but it definitely can be done, and we'll talk about those ways in a minute. So some other approaches to incorporating play, we want to make sure that we honestly plan for it, okay? We want to write it in. Remembering that play is a natural and an instinctive way to learn. If we can, if it's allowed and it can be done safely, we would want to incorporate more free play, making sure that we have time and space for children to process their emotions, to talk about those feelings of uncertainty, lack of control, or anxiety that might come out through play. So we want to be able to, we want to be sure that we are attuned to that and that we also have opportunities to address those things. Outdoor time. So again, I think I've said it time and time again, outdoor time is vital for health and well-being. That fresh air and that space allow for the opportunity to let out steam. Um, Loose parts, if you haven't heard of loose parts, this is actually kind of a concept that is very popular in early childhood education. Now, with some of our restrictions on shared equipment, this might be a little bit more difficult, but I think it can also be done. I did include a handout on loose parts to Krista. It really is a great way to stimulate creativity and imagination. Loose part play is really open-ended, and any age-appropriate resource or material is appropriate. So things that are loose parts are things like scrap paper, empty cartons, pegs, twigs, pebbles, old clothes, leaves, etc. For sanitation purposes, you know, you could have children sanitize before and after if shared equipment is allowed in your district. The guidance from ISB does say that equipment can be shared, but it does certainly have to go through sanitation procedures. But another idea when we think about incorporating loose parts as play is it wouldn't take much for each student to have their own small bin of loose parts, right? Many of things that are loose parts are free or easily available. So there is a way that we can modify and adapt loose part play. And then, of course, hygiene is important. So we need to have play resources and materials that are easily cleaned or that are even disposable, which kind of the environmentalist in me that bothers me a little bit, but that's something that we need to be aware of. So there's another concept too that I want to touch on briefly that's called active recess. So this is a semi-structured or structured recess break from the school day. It typically is before lunch. This information I actually got from the Minnesota Department of Public Health, and they are encouraging their schools in Minnesota to engage and plan active recess every single day. So some strategies for active recess include teaching games that limit physical contact. So things like relays where we don't touch each other, maybe we touch the ground, we just air high five. Things like red light, green light, those types of games can be incorporated during active recess. They also suggested organizing a walking or a running club because those things can generally be done with limited physical contact, track and field type events, or even hosting or having playground rotating challenges that are not dependent on equipment. So just an interesting side note today, as I was kind of scrolling through my social media, I saw that St. Mary's in Sterling has adapted, they were just thanking somebody on their school Facebook page because they have a no contact, recess playground. And I was like, so interested to learn more, but obviously it was this morning, so I didn't have the time or the space to reach out to them. But there are ways that you can make recess no or limited contact. So another great way to provide a break during our days and breaks. These are short little classroom activities. They've been shown to decrease stress, increase productivity, boost our brain function, and even provide those opportunities to practice social skills. So when we are engaging in brain breaks, it allows our brain to consolidate memories, to reflect on past experiences, and even plan for the future. When we incorporate a physical activity with the brain break, it's been linked to positive structural changes in the brain. Again, improving those areas of the brain that increase memory and attention, as well as cognitive functions. So I'm a big fan of brain breaks. I often do them actually in my own work with Extension, especially when I'm delivering longer educational sessions. It's always good to give our brain a break and increase our attention. So when we are providing brain breaks throughout our instructional time, whether we're teaching in person or we're teaching virtually, it can help our students stay focused. So, and it doesn't need to be overly complicated or even overly structured. Honestly, when I have kind of a, 5 to 10 brain break ideas that I just keep in my back pocket. And when I notice that they're generally adult learners, when they're starting to lose focus, attention, when I can sense the energy level is, declining in my sessions, I just whip one of those things out. They generally don't take a lot of equipment or resources, so you can do them really anytime, anywhere. So some research that I did find for remote learning does suggest a time frame, okay, because that could be a little bit harder to ascertain if people need a break. So if we're strictly doing remote learning, children in grade school, most of them will need a 10 to 15 minute or a break after 10 to 15 minutes of online instruction. Others, older students, can go up to 30 minutes. Now that might sound like, oh my gosh, all I'm going to be doing is giving people a break. There's this whole other concept that we don't have time to get into today, but it's called Zoom fatigue. And I've done a little bit of research as to what actually happens in the brain when we are doing virtual-based learning. Essentially, when we are in person, our brain is taking in all the information around us, and it's looking at little subtle clues like body movements and facial expressions and even just body positioning. Some of that is lost when we are in a virtual only mode. So our brain essentially has to work harder to make sense of that information, which is why we experience more fatigue. So I think it's going to be pretty important to give students as many brain breaks as possible. So the research I did found, and I actually shared in the handout, I'm not going to go over these at all, but there are some traditional brain break activities that help the brain pay attention better and increase that novelty and curiosity. And all of that can lead to emotional regulation. So in your handout, there are 4 listed. One is funny talk, which is essentially touching the roof of your mouth with your tongue and trying to speak. So that's kind of a fun little one. I have scribbles on this page because that's another quick little brain break that we can do where students hold a different color of marker in each hand and they just draw or scribble to the beat of some music for 30 seconds. And then once you're done, we kind of see what it looks like. Did it turn into anything familiar? What do you see in that, which enhances creativity? So there are some good resources in the handout for you. So Krista has the handout. So I think she put it in your folder. We'll talk about that at the end of our time together in a few minutes. So focused attention practices, I tend to think of these brain breaks more as kind of mindfulness breaks, if you will. These are activities that focus on promoting attention. And a lot of times they also focus on breathing and overall awareness. And all of that helps us brings us back to the present moment, so we are more ready to learn. So the ones that are listed in the handout, again, I provided 4. There's one with an ice cube, which I think will be a little bit hard to do in the classroom, but there is a little script on deep breathing, a so what activity, which really kind of teaches children to release negative thoughts as they might occur. So really some great resources. And both of these resources were from Edutopia, which they have tons of free resources for educators that are open source too. So you can use them really for anything. Now, I also don't want to forget physically focused activities for brain breaks. Okay, so implementing physically focused activities really can be in an in-person way or even a virtual classroom. They simply rely on simple physical movements. So even things like yoga and like yoga stretches and different poses can be implemented. Standing up at your desk and marching in place for 30 seconds. Balance and coordination activities like standing on one foot or doing the windmills, you know, where you're touching one toe and touching one toe, or repetitive movements like tapping your toes on the chair or the floor, hopping side to side, even just sitting, standing. All of those little physical activities, they might not be as fun as some of the other brain breaks, but they're still just as effective, okay? So one thing I wanted to note before I talk about some specific activities, some educators might feel that implementing brain breaks might disrupt the flow of classroom learning, but when they're planned effectively, when they're regularly implemented, students can begin to learn that brain breaks are a regular part of the classroom, regular part of their day, and they might even potentially start seeing them as a reward for doing the hard work of the day. So in your handout and on the screen, I have some of my favorite brain breaks that we're going to just kind of run through them real quick, because a big part of my job as an extension educator is to connect people with resources. So in researching outdoor play and brain breaks, I found many great existing resources for you to explore and try out in your classrooms. Those are all listed in your handout. I will tell you, as a recreation professional, it's really killing me that I even have to do this virtually, because I would love nothing more for all of us to be in a room together and demonstrate and try these out together. But we're gonna give it a try virtually here. As time allows, we will try to do some of these activities. So I do want to start with some brain break challenges that I especially like. So the first one, the math pairs. This is probably my favorite one to do with kids, because it does kind of support and reinforce some math skills, but it's kind of fun. So it's very similar to rock, paper, scissors. And oftentimes when I'm working with students in the classroom, I'll say, and generally, I would say this works with probably grades 3 and up. I've regularly used it with 5th graders. Generally, I would say, have you guys ever played rock, paper, scissors? So they instantly know, oh yeah, I know what rock, paper, scissors is. This game is kind of like that. You have students put their hands behind their backs, and when the instructor says go, they bring forth any combination of fingers. So I have 7 here right now. Okay. The challenge is they're facing a partner. So again, we can be physically distanced. We don't have to be right on top of each other, and we're certainly not touching each other. But when I'm facing my partner, the challenge is to add up all the fingers that I'm showing and all the fingers they're showing and be the first one to say what the correct number is. So it's pretty fun to play, and kids it surprises me because it's like, oh, it's math, but it's pretty simple math, and that activity that, oh, I'm gonna win at this game, and it can just be really engaging. And if you ever, if you have a higher grade level, you can always make it more challenging by having the students multiply instead of add. So this one is in your handout. Thumbs up. I actually think I did this one last time. I wish I could see myself. Okay, I only had one little square. So the thumbs up is essentially this challenge. So you put one thumb up, one finger out, and then you switch. And you go back and forth as fast as you can. Krista, you got it. You've been with me before when we've done this. It can be challenging, but it's funny, right? And I often tell kids too, because kids always want to say, oh, I'm no good at this, or they giggle, they start laughing, and it's a good time to reinforce that sometimes when we concentrate, we have to be quiet because our brains can only do one thing at a time. So that's a fun one. Okay, another one is snap wink. It's very similar to this. So it's gonna be weird to do virtually, but the idea here is you snap your fingers. So obviously you'd have to have a group that's old enough that they can snap their fingers. So snap with your right hand, and wink your right or your left eye at the same time. And then you switch. So snap with your left hand and wink with your right eye. It's great. It's great. But see, laughing is part of playfulness, right? Laughing is what resets that sense of normalcy. Okay, my other go-to one is this ear nose switch. So I always instruct students, take your right hand, point your finger to the, or Take your right hand, excuse me, cross it over to your left ear. Left hand, point your finger to the sky, put it on your nose. And first of all, I point out how funny everybody looks doing this because it's funny. But then the challenge is to switch. So you're switching your hands go to the opposite ear and the other hand goes to the opposite nose. And if you can't get it in this quick little rundown of time that we have, that's fine. You know, you can practice these later. You can giggle. All of the steps are in your handout. One other one that's my favorite that really gets people thinking is called This Is My Nose. And now this one involves body parts. So, you know, there has to be a certain level of, you know, what body parts we use and don't use. But the idea here is you would have the students stand up generally in a circle. They could even just stand at their desks. How I see this working, it could even work virtually as well if everyone can see each other. But you have one student that's a leader, or the teacher could start, and they would like point to their elbow and say, "This is my nose." Okay, so I would say, "This is my nose," and then say I picked on Krista. "Krista, this is my nose." Krista would then have to say, "This is my elbow." So you point to the opposite body part and say, or you point to the correct body part, but you say the body part that the first person touched. Okay, so pretty fun. And then finally, the would you rather. I've done this actually in classroom parties that my kids have been in, and the kids really, really like this because it's essentially forced choices. So would you rather, you're essentially asking a question. It can be serious, it can be funny, it can even be related to some content that you're teaching, and the children have to make a choice. Generally, what happens is this wall is one choice, that wall is another choice, right? But if we don't want students moving around, we can simply have them stand up or sit down. I've even done this on Zoom virtually through the use of polls, where I just put up a poll, would you rather, and people pick one. So just some quick questions. Would you rather live in a submarine or in space? Would you rather turn into a squirrel or turn into a cat? They can get gross. So again, know your audience. Here's one. Would you rather lick the bottom of your shoe or eat your least favorite food? Now, again, depending on your kids that you have in your classroom, I tend to pick ones that are a little bit, you know, more fun, but kids like the gross ones too. So you can even find them as holiday related as well. So all of those are in your handout. Just super quickly, don't forget those classic activities, right? All of these activities can be done with limited contact, limited resources, right? So don't forget that these classic games work as well. Oh, yay, Stacy. Yes, directions are in the handout. I want to just touch base. There are a couple of active recess games I also have in your handout as well. I found these in different resources that I have as a recreation professional: Captain's Orders, the True False Run, and In the River. Again, all of the directions are listed in your handout. As well as I want to just draw your attention in our last 2 minutes together. I found this really, really, really great guide, really actually a really great organization. It's called Playworks. They have a safe return to play guide. This is going to be your go-to. I'm telling you right now, Penny, PE teacher, this has, I couldn't even count all the activities. Yes, couldn't even count all the activities. What's amazing about this resource is they have them categorized into risk levels. So low risk, medium risk, high risk games. They have modifications that you could do. And then they also have modifications for virtual play. So love, love, love this guide. It is a free printable resource. Like, I got chills just now telling you guys about it. Like, seriously, it was like the thing I was most excited to find. The link is listed in your handout. Also, Playworks also has a game library. So the game library is also free, accessible. You can download this game guide that you see right here. You can download that. Now, this one's not as fancy in that it's not sorted out by risk, but it's still lots of great information for you, and it's free. Playworks also has, again, it's listed in your handout, Playworks also has this recess guideline, What I liked about this PDF, it's also printable and it's free. It shares recess and outdoor play ideas for 4 different learning options. So in a school in a pod, in a school but socially distanced, live recess, and virtual recess. So some ideas, and it includes, each learning option has sanitization, scheduling, space, equipment, games, adult participation, has all that guidance for you. And then the final resource I included on your handout is our SnapEd Toolkit. Now, I work a lot with SnapEd. It's a program that U of I Extension promotes and delivers throughout the state. They have an online resource for physical activity. Now, this guidance was developed for families to stay active at home. But as you scroll down, there are lots of digital resources available for physical activity. So with that, I know we talked a lot today, and I tell you, I always plan more and like cram it in, right? Because I get so passionate about this. But we talked a lot today about why play is important, and I really hope that you consider how you're going to incorporate play and playfulness into this school year. So I hope you walk away with that plan today, or at least the plan to start thinking about it. But I do want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes, and you've probably seen this quote. You know, Fred Rogers was a champion of children. He was especially focused towards caring and envisioning a better world. And I hope that today you've become equipped and inspired to approach this unique and challenging school year with play and playfulness. But I also want to leave you with one final thought from Fred Rogers. He gave it in his final commencement speech in 2002. He says, "Anyone who has ever been able to sustain good work has had at least one person, and often many, who have believed in him or her. We just don't get to be competent human beings without a lot of different investments from others. From the time you were very little, you've had people who have smiled you into smiling, people who have talked you into talking, sung you into singing, and loved you into loving. So I wish you a school year of smiling, talking, singing, and playing." So 10:01, I made it. So I really hope you check out that resource, the handout I gave you, because ideally I would have loved to have actually done some of those activities with you. I'm a hands-on person, but time in our virtual option doesn't really allow for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Krista.
Oh, thank you. I got tons of resources from that. I know many do too. And I've been looking through the handouts as you were referencing them. So it's all in there for takeaways, which is extra helpful. So we want to give you a big thank you, Carla. I said this is kind of our culmination. We made it through all of the last 5 and 6 months. And next week, many are headed back to school. So good luck to everyone in their upcoming year. Take lots of time to play and have those brain breaks. And as always, Carla, we appreciate you so much. Thanks.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Have a great school year, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Bye. Go be playful now.